In this video, I'll be ranking supplements based on how much muscle they can help you build and how beneficial they are on average to your health. Those are the two criteria I'll be using. At the end of the video, I'll reveal what I think might be the single most underrated supplement. Next up, we have arguably the goated muscle growth supplement, creatine. More specifically, creatine monohydrate. Creatine is by far the most studied hypertrophy supplement. And in fact, when looking at it in a meta-analysis, it might help you gain more muscle by up to 3 pounds in a given year. The same benefits seem to apply to things like strength and even power. So if you're a sprinter, if you're a strength athlete, or just someone who wants to gain muscle, creatine monohydrate is something you should consider. Bonus points, it even has potential benefits for things like brain health and bone health. However, I must confess to you, I've not been having the sand recently. Instead, I've been having delicious creatine gummies by Tasty Gains. Each of these gummies has 1 gram creatine. So just take 3 to 5 a day for your 3 to 5 grams and you're covered. The reason there's nearly none left, everyone's been eating them. I'm not even joking. So if you don't enjoy traditional creatine powder, texture, gritty, sand stuff, and you'd like to still get your creatine monohydrate in, and you'd like it to be candy as well, check out Tasty Gains creatine gummies. Very good, very delicious, third-party tested. You get what you want. I'll leave a link in the description. Oh, and by the way, S tier. Next up, we have vitamin D. And while this isn't the best muscle building supplement, it's an underrated supplement even today for overall health. See, most people live in countries like mine where you don't get much sunlight during the day. And in fact, as a result, a fair amount of adults tend to have a deficiency in vitamin D. The thing about vitamin D is that it's dirt cheap. So if you live in a country where you don't get a ton of sunlight and you suspect you might be deficient, either take a blood test or just buy vitamin D, take 1,000 IUs a day, and you'll never have to worry about it again. It's that simple, and for overall health, honestly, vitamin D, low S tier. Next up, we have omega-3s. You might think that they're just as effective as vitamin D, and that's what I used to think as well. But see, more recent research has actually shown that omega-3s, unless you're having no fatty fish whatsoever, tend to have very modest benefits on health at best. In fact, it's not even clear that adding in DHA into omega-3s versus just having purified EPA seems to improve health any further. Especially if you're already consuming some fatty fish, I really wouldn't worry about it. Mid-B tier for cost effectiveness overall. Next up, we have testosterone boosters. There's a variety of supplements on the market claiming to help you boost your testosterone and as a result, help you build more muscle. Let's start with the 2 testosterone boosters that actually have some evidence behind them. The first one is Tongkat Ali, and there are a few studies showing an increase in total testosterone when supplementing with Tongkat Ali. However, most of these studies are of a relatively low quality, and the ones that do find a benefit are generally in hypogonadal men who have low levels of testosterone to begin with. Importantly, many of these studies measure total testosterone, not free testosterone. Since free testosterone is the kind that actually helps you build more muscle, this is an important distinction. Right now, the research just isn't quite there yet for me to recommend Tongkat Ali as a testosterone booster. I would rather someone focus on good nutrition, sleep, managing stress as a much better intervention for boosting their testosterone. Additionally, given most of the research is in hypogonadal men, I just don't think that there's research yet to support its use for people who aren't deficient in testosterone. For that reason, Tongkat Ali goes into C tier. The second testosterone booster that has some evidence behind it is ashwagandha. Many of the same points about the research on Tongkat Ali also apply to ashwagandha. With that being said, ashwagandha has some cool research around it with regards to stress and other potential benefits. Overall, the research specifically for testosterone boosting and boosting hypertrophy just isn't there yet. As a result, also into C tier it goes. Believe it or not, those 2 supplements are the ones with the most research in their favor when it comes to boosting testosterone and therefore your hypertrophy. Other testosterone boosters have even less research behind them. And in fact, that's why numerous systematic reviews over the past few years have all come to the conclusion that testosterone boosters in athletes or just healthy people in general can't really be recommended just yet. Fadoja agrestis, Shilajit, Tribulus terrestris, and Maca. All of these supplements are commonly touted to boost testosterone, but when you look at the research, they have at best a couple studies behind them, and oftentimes those studies aren't even that compelling, sometimes don't even look at total testosterone, much less free testosterone, or any hypertrophy-related outcomes. In fact, people who commonly hype testosterone boosters are typically relying on studies in mice. Effects observed in rodents do sometimes generalize to humans, but that is still a leap that you need to resolve before I can broadly recommend these supplements to you, dear viewer. For the time being, I'll put all of these into D tier. I really wouldn't consider them. Another common culprit in pre-workout supplement ingredients is beta-alanine. See, there's plenty of research about beta-alanine in endurance sports, But when it comes to lifting, it's not super clear it actually helps. See, beta-alanine is most effective at boosting performance for tasks lasting at least a minute or two, and most lifting sets don't last that long. See, the goal of beta-alanine supplementation is to get to a certain level within the muscle. And to get to that level, you have to take quite a bit of beta-alanine. And that's where the issue comes in. When you take a lot of beta-alanine at once, as you often do in pre-workout supplements, you get tingles, which most people don't like. Or what you can do to avoid this is take multiple smaller doses throughout the day, separated by a few hours. But that's also a pain. So any way you slice it, it's kind of a pain. There's also no reason for it to be in your pre-workout, since it doesn't boost performance acutely in the few hours after. It boosts it chronically. Finally, there's not really any studies on building muscle. And so, for the time being, unfortunately, beta-alanine goes into low beta. Believe it or not, citrulline malate has gotten a fair few studies behind it now. Citrulline malate can help boost your performance by improving your metabolic efficiency and by improving blood flow around your body. It's something called a nitric oxide precursor, helping your blood vessels vasodilate. Fancy talk for better blood flow. In fact, in one study, they compared the effects on performance of taking just citrulline malate, just caffeine, citrulline malate plus caffeine, or a placebo. And caffeine, by far, seemed to have the biggest impact. Combining caffeine and citrulline didn't seem to provide much of an additional edge, whereas just taking citrulline did actually improve performance slightly. So there's some promise, but it's not an S-tier supplement. Instead, I'd put it into A-tier. Decent and potentially helpful, but not quite the best. If you do decide to supplement with it, take 8 to 12 grams about an hour before working out. What about protein sources? Let's start with whey protein. Whey protein is the goated for real protein source. It's, in fact, the protein source, the gold standard, the benchmark other protein sources are compared to in the research when it comes to things like myofibrillar protein synthesis, aka muscle growth. It has all the qualities of a good protein source you look for. It has a great amino acid profile, plenty of leucine, but a sufficient amount of each of the 8 essential amino acids. It's very fast digesting, which in general is a good thing for muscle protein synthesis. Compared to some plant-based protein sources, it's also highly digestible. With improvements in flavor, texture, and everything else, it's a very versatile protein source too. You can integrate it into baking, you can just have it on its own, and it tastes pretty good nowadays. It is the gold standard for protein supplements. S tier. One of the types of protein supplements is casein protein. People typically refer to casein protein as being slow digesting, but that's not entirely true. Casein protein is only slow digesting when you compare it to whey protein, which is one of the fastest digesting proteins in existence. In contrast, when you compare casein protein to a mixed meal with carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, that mixed meal will often digest more slowly than casein. And this is important because people recommend casein protein as a pre-bed protein source, such that you have casein protein before you go to bed, and then while you're sleeping, your body's constantly taking that casein protein and helping you build muscle. However, gram for gram, casein protein is actually of a slightly lower quality compared to whey protein and many animal protein sources. So, unless you really like casein protein and its texture and its applications, I wouldn't really use it as a first resort. Instead, I'd turn to whey protein, or plant-based proteins are just fine too. Casein protein goes into B tier. It has some uses, but it's not the protein I would recommend most commonly as a supplement. Now, I just mentioned plant-based proteins tend to be a bit less digestible. And that's true. That's not to say plant-based proteins are all bad though. Soy protein, for example, is of pretty high quality, and in many studies scores just as favorably as whey protein. It's not quite as good, but it's pretty close. And several plant-based proteins are pretty effective. Pea protein is another one, especially if you mix it with rice protein. You can get many of the same benefits in terms of having plenty of leucine, having a complete amino acid profile from these protein sources. And if you're someone who cares about the environment or animal welfare or anything else, they're totally good options. But purely as far as building muscle goes, they are still likely slightly worse. So into high A tier we go. You see all these supplements? They're fine. But you know what's better? Getting your training on lock. Locking in, winter arc style, MyoAdapt. If you want to maximize your hypertrophy at a fraction of the cost of a good coach, I would highly recommend MyoAdapt. Go to myoadapt.com and sign up to be notified when it finally launches. You will receive both a free trial and a lifetime discount if you choose to sign up. Next, multivitamin supplements. If you look at the cross-sectional research on people who use multivitamins versus people who don't, you'd be surprised to know that most studies do not find a benefit to using multivitamins. But why is that? Well, for one, micronutrient deficiencies in omnivores are actually surprisingly rare. Second, most multivitamins aren't formulated particularly effectively either. If you have a balanced diet already, it's unlikely adding in a multivitamin will actually make you healthier. There are some exceptions to this though. If you've been cutting for a long time and your calorie intake is substantially lower than it would usually be, which restricts your food choices, this can sometimes result in minor deficiencies in certain micronutrients. Taking a multivitamin during your weight loss phases, or if you're a bodybuilder during your contest preparation phases, can be a nice safety net, so to speak. It just covers your micronutrient basis in case maybe you're lacking in certain nutrients. But overall, because multivitamins are only really potentially beneficial when you're in an extended cut phase, I would put them into low beta. Next up, we have BCAAs. These used to be all the rage in the 2000s and 2010s in the fitness industry, but they've since mostly been abandoned, and for good reason. See, the idea behind BCAAs is that they were effectively just better protein, but in reality, complete protein sources need to contain all 8 essential amino acids to be optimal for building muscle. BCAAs, on the other hand, only contain 4. And while they do contain the most important amino acid for muscle growth, leucine, which is responsible for essentially turning on the switch of muscle growth, they don't contain all 8 essential amino acids, which means on their own, they won't be sufficient to build muscle, say, after a workout. Because of this fact, they're effectively always inferior to a complete protein source like whey protein. And I have never ever, as a coach, recommended BCAAs. As a result, into D tier they go. EAAs, or essential amino acids, are essentially the slightly better version of branched chain amino acids. They in fact contain all 8 essential amino acids, in contrast to BCAAs, but still, compared to a better protein source like whey protein, I just struggle to recommend them. They're typically more expensive, they don't have some of the beneficial digestibility and overall anabolic properties that whey protein has. Overall, I would put them into B tier, just because there's a better alternative out there in the form of whey protein. Last, and most definitely least, we have HMB. See, in the 2010s, this supplement was all the hype, and that was off the back of a few studies that were later found to likely be not so legit. They found that HMB could boost muscle growth just as much as taking steroids did. However, follow-up studies by other labs failed to replicate such a large benefit of HMB. And so, for the time being, I really wouldn't recommend HMB. It's probably the last supplement I'd ever recommend. I have never recommended it. Low DTA. What about collagen protein? You know BCAAs and EAAs aren't that effective. Collagen protein is another one you see talked about frequently. Well, for muscle building, it's a pretty bad choice. It doesn't consistently elevate muscle protein synthesis to the same levels as whey protein does. And even as far as improving your joint health, it doesn't seem to do anything beyond what something like whey protein would do. It doesn't elevate connective tissue protein synthesis any further. Now, there is some evidence suggesting it might help with joint pain, but this is a very limited body of evidence, which does suffer with some limitations. Overall, collagen protein also goes into D tier. Speaking of single ingredients, let's start with caffeine. Caffeine is by far the main active ingredient responsible for boosting performance when it comes to pre-workouts. Think back to that study I mentioned earlier comparing citrulline to citrulline plus caffeine to placebo. Just taking caffeine got nearly all of the improvement in performance compared to taking both at the same time. So while citrulline malate is also commonly in pre-workout supplements, just caffeine is kind of all you need from a good pre-workout. And yes, you can get this from pills, you can get it from coffee, you can even get it from an energy drink. Anything will do as long as it has caffeine in it. While it does boost performance, whether it will actually increase muscle growth is still an open question. But if you do desire to take it, I would take 1 to 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight around half an hour before your workout. Caution is advised. Don't take it too late into the day, much past noon or so, because it may negatively impact your sleep. Bonus tip. While you can get caffeine from a variety of sources, and they'll do just fine for performance, when it comes to health, coffee is actually pretty underrated. In fact, consuming up to 3 to 4 cups of coffee per day seems to improve health. So, have your coffee and enjoy it too. Next up, we have pre-workout supplements more broadly. Now, pre-workout supplements vary quite a bit in terms of their exact composition. And in fact, I go as far as to say, most pre-workout supplements are not effective as far as the dosages or even the supplements they contain. Based on how many people advocate for pre-workout supplement use, you would think we have tons of studies using pre-workouts and finding more muscle growth as a result of using them. The truth is, we only have a couple of studies, and these studies aren't even that compelling. So instead, what we can do is look at individual ingredients. Before we move on to individual ingredients, let me put pre-workouts as a category into C tier. They may or may not benefit you. This final supplement might just be the most underrated one I don't see nearly anyone speaking about, and that's beetroot extract, or more broadly speaking, dietary nitrate. Beetroot juice or beetroot extract is a very common supplement in most endurance sports. But when it comes to lifting, it seems to be the fitness world's best kept secret. There's a fair bit of research showing that supplementing with beetroot juice or beetroot extract can boost outcomes like muscle power, but there are also some studies on bench pressing, for example, showing it can boost muscle endurance. While we do need studies showing it can actually increase hypertrophy over the course of, say, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, or a whole year, it does suggest that there might be something to beetroot extract or dietary nitrate more broadly. There is one hang-up though, and that's that beetroot juice can get quite costly. Fortunately, there is an alternative. Get dietary nitrate from your diet. If you aim for around 400 to 800 milligrams of dietary nitrate per day, you'll likely be covered. As you might have guessed, beets are a great source of dietary nitrate, but other dark leafy vegetables like spinach, lettuce, and rocket are also great sources. But ultimately, a balanced diet is actually where most of your gains will come from, not so much the supplements, and dietary nitrate is a great example of that. Likewise, while most of your gains from the gym will come from just lifting and dieting consistently, supplementing that with the best clothing in the game will help. rascalapparel.com, shop there, use code WOLF at checkout for 10% off. Dr. Milo Wolf, all the supplements ranked. Until next time. If you'd like me to coach you, consider taking a look at the link above to see what I offer.